The White House, standing at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, has long been hailed as a monument to American democracy, a symbol of continuity, and the home of the nation's highest office. Its elegant neoclassical facade, modeled on European ideals of balance and proportion, represents the aspirations of a young republic seeking legitimacy on the global stage. Yet hidden in its marble walls and stone foundations lies a less celebrated truth, namely, that the White House was built, in significant measure, by enslaved African laborers. This fact, once downplayed or omitted from traditional accounts, reveals the deep entanglement of slavery with the origins of the United States, complicating the narrative of liberty and independence that Americans so proudly proclaim. To understand how enslaved people became central to the construction of this national symbol, one must examine the early history of Washington, D.C., the decision to use enslaved labor, the daily realities of the workers, and the enduring legacy of their unacknowledged contributions. When the United States emerged from the Revolution, one of the pressing questions was where to locate the nation's capital. For years, Congress had met in various cities, from Philadelphia to New York, but a permanent seat of government was seen as necessary to project stability. The choice of location was deeply political. Northern states wanted the capital further north, while southern states sought to keep it closer to their plantations. The matter was settled in 1790 through a political compromise orchestrated by Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson. In exchange for Hamilton's plan for federal assumption of state debts, Jefferson secured agreement that the capital would be built along the Potomac River near Virginia and Maryland, slave-holding regions. President George Washington oversaw the selection of the precise location, a swath of land carved from Maryland and Virginia plantations. The new district would be named Washington, D.C., in his honor. But while the site was chosen with political balance in mind, the practical realities of building a city from scratch required labor, and at that time, that labor meant the use of enslaved Africans. By the early 1790s, the newly designated capital site was sparsely populated, largely rural, and heavily reliant on slave-based agriculture. The labor force of free artisans and European immigrants was small, and there was an urgent need to mobilize workers quickly to meet deadlines for building the federal city. Commissioners appointed to oversee construction faced the dilemma of limited manpower and tight budgets. The solution they embraced was to rely heavily on enslaved workers, who could be hired from local slaveholders at relatively low cost. This practice of hiring out enslaved labor was common in the region at the time. Owners would temporarily lease enslaved men to public or private projects, pocketing their wages while providing minimal food, clothing, and shelter. The enslaved themselves had no say in the matter and gained no benefit beyond the hope of survival. For the commissioners, it was a practical arrangement. Enslaved workers could be secured in large numbers and made to do both unskilled and skilled craftsmanship. Then came the designing of the White House. While the city itself was being laid out by Pierre-Charles L'Enfant, attention turned to the President's House, which would serve as the executive mansion. A design competition was held in 1792, and Irish-born architect James Hoban's neoclassical plan was chosen. His design called for a grand yet restrained building, constructed largely of stone, with elegant proportions and a symmetry befitting a republic that sought to rival the grandeur of Europe without appearing monarchical. The vision, however, required immense labor to realize. Stone had to be quarried, cut, and hauled. Timber had to be felled, sawed, and shaped. Bricks had to be molded and fired. Foundations had to be dug deep into the earth. And for all of this, enslaved workers would play a central role. The sandstone that would form the core of the White House came from quarries at Aquia Creek in Stafford County, Virginia. There, gangs of enslaved laborers extracted massive blocks of stone under grueling conditions. Working with crude tools, they cut and hauled the heavy sandstone onto barges, which were then floated up the Potomac to Washington. Upon arrival, more enslaved men unloaded the stone and transported it to the construction site. At the building site itself, enslaved stonemasons and carvers shaped the blocks, while laborers hoisted them into place to form the mansion's walls. Others dug foundations, mixed mortar, and cleared the surrounding land. Skilled enslaved carpenters built scaffolding, laid floors, and crafted woodwork for the interiors. Blacksmiths forged nails, hinges, and tools. In every phase of construction, enslaved labor was present. The daily grind was harsh. Enslaved men toiled from sunrise to sunset under the supervision of overseers, with little rest and meager rations. Injuries were common, and punishment awaited those who slowed or resisted. Unlike free workers, they had no recourse, no wages, and no recognition. Yet their work was indispensable. Without their labor, the White House could not have been built on time or at scale. The paradox deepened as the first presidents took up residence. When John Adams moved into the unfinished mansion in 1800, the building was still surrounded by mud, scaffolding, and partially completed wings. Adams himself did not own slaves, but he occupied a home built by them. The truth remains that the building that symbolized liberty was both constructed and maintained through bondage. The White House became a workplace not only for presidents but also for enslaved African Americans who lived in its shadows. They cooked meals, cleaned rooms, tended fires, and attended to the needs of presidents and their families. Their presence, often unacknowledged in official records, highlights how slavery was woven into the very fabric of the presidency itself. One of the greatest tragedies of this history is the anonymity forced upon those who labored. Because enslaved people were legally considered property, records often list only the names of their owners. Contracts note payments made to Negro hirelings or to masters who leased them out, but the names of the actual workers rarely survive. Their identities, skills, and lives were obscured by the system that exploited them. Nonetheless, evidence shows that many enslaved men possessed significant expertise. They were carpenters, brickmakers, masons, and craftsmen, trained through years of coerced labor on plantations and estates. Their skills shaped the White House's physical form, from its solid stone foundations to its refined woodwork. The building bears silent witness to their mastery, even if history long denied them credit. The White House did not remain static. In 1814, during the War of 1812, British troops set fire to the mansion, gutting much of its interior. Reconstruction once again relied heavily on enslaved laborers, who helped rebuild and expand the residence. In later years, as wings and porticos were added, enslaved workers continued to contribute to the physical evolution of the White House. Thus, their labor was not confined to its original construction, but remained central throughout its early decades. It should be noted, however, that the White House was not the only federal building constructed by enslaved labor. The U.S. Capitol, the Treasury Building, and other landmarks of Washington, D.C., also rose from their toil. In fact, the Capitol itself became a hub of slavery. Enslaved people were bought and sold in the city's markets, and slave pens operated within sight of the Capitol dome. Foreign visitors often remarked on the irony of slavery flourishing in the very heart of a republic founded on liberty. This contradiction was not lost on African Americans themselves, free or enslaved. For them, the White House could never be merely a symbol of freedom. It was also a monument built on their sweat. For much of American history, the role of enslaved laborers in building the White House was overlooked or deliberately ignored. Traditional narratives celebrated the genius of architects, the vision of presidents, and the skill of European artisans, while relegating African Americans to invisibility. It was only in the late 20th century, as historians and activists pressed for a fuller accounting of the nation's past, that the contributions of enslaved workers began to be acknowledged. Today, plaques, exhibits, and scholarly research have sought to restore their memory. The White House Historical Association has documented the role of enslaved labor, and in 2016, First Lady Michelle Obama famously reminded the nation that she wakes up every morning in a house that was built by slaves.
The story of this country, the story that has brought me to this stage tonight, the story of generations of people who felt the lash of bondage, the shame of servitude, the sting of segregation, but who kept on striving and hoping and doing what needed to be done so that today I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves.
Her words resonated worldwide, capturing both the pain of that legacy and the progress represented by her own presence in the executive mansion. The White House remains a paradox, a home of freedom built on unfreedom, a monument to democracy forged in slavery. Recognizing this history does not in any way diminish the building's significance, but deepens it, reminding Americans that their national story is complex and fraught with contradictions. The enslaved laborers who built the White House left no inscriptions on its walls, no signatures on its stone, but their legacy is embedded in the building itself. Their story forces Americans to confront the realities of slavery not as a distant blemish, but as a foundational element of the nation's history. The White House stands today as one of the most recognized buildings in the world, a symbol of power and liberty. But its true history cannot be told without acknowledging the enslaved African Americans who quarried its stones, cut its timber, and shaped its walls. They worked without recognition or freedom, yet their labor made possible the home of the presidency and the enduring symbol of the United States. To honor their contributions is to confront the contradictions of American history and to recognize that the struggle for freedom has always been shadowed by bondage. In remembering them, we not only restore dignity to the forgotten builders of the White House, but also acknowledge that the pursuit of liberty in America has been, from the beginning, a contested and incomplete project, one whose legacy continues to shape the nation today. Thanks for watching this edition of History Files, and do remember to subscribe to the channel or follow the page for more historical videos.